Well, here we are, folks. Welcome. And another Tuesday evening, another live stream. And this time it's a property stream. Plenty to talk about, of course, with everything that's going on. I've got Veronica online. She'll be with me in a moment or two. I'll just leave the pre-show running for a moment and give you a view of the old doggies. We managed to go and round Luna up. She'd gone to sleep on the other bed. So I shooed her back to sit on the mat and shut her out of the other room so that she has to play. But they always sit as far apart as they can, which is hilarious. It looks like they've squabbled, but they haven't really. They just have their own space. So that's the current state of the dogs. And of course, everyone is here for the doggy cams rather than the property news, but that's another story. Okay, well, I reckon that's enough extra time to give people a chance to get in. We're just on time now, so I'm going to take the pre-show off. I'm going to run the intro and I'll be back and we'll get going in real time. Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 22nd of November 2022. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on for another property ride. I've got Veronica who will be coming in very shortly, but just before I bring her in, as always, I will just remind you that we are not providing property, financial, legal advice. It's a general conversation only. We do moderate the stream, encourage you to share your thoughts, but please just be careful what you say. As at the 22nd of November 2022, if you're watching in replay, and if you'd like to ask a question, then use that Walk the World. That'll make sure you get into my queue, and I can then put the question up on the screen and we can deal with it. I've also enabled Super Chat, and if you want to use Super Chat, you can get your question to the top of the list or indeed make a contribution to what we do around here. We do this not to make a profit, but simply because we think this is a really important conversation at this particular time. Right, so let me push this button. Veronica, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very good. Good to have you back on again. A few months since we had the last conversation, and well, the property market's morphed a bit more, hasn't it?
Oh, it just keeps us alive, right? You know, that nothing stays still. Everyone seems to think that the property should stay high, the property market should stay high or stay low or whatever, but it just keeps moving. Keeps us interesting.
Yeah, bobbing and weaving and diving. It's always good. And what I find interesting is that the mainstream media and the real estate rags are trying to tell part of the story, but actually not really the full story. And so what we're trying to do here tonight is to try and peel the onion a bit and come down to some of the real things that are going on, because property is complex. Property in the current environment is complexer, if there's such a word.
Complexer and complexer. And the problem is with headlines, as we all know, they're just wanting to get you to click, and sensationalism is what it's all about. There's not really anybody that worried about the nuance, So that's what we're all about, Martin, right? The nuance, the granular.
Yeah, the nuance window, right? And that's really important because there is not a binary story about property, right, which is universally true in every location at any one point in time or indeed over time. And that's really the trick. So you and I both say, you've got to go granular. You've got to really get to understand what's really going on. And frankly, don't be misled by, the property portals and their high-level indices or, the other stuff that's out there, or even the stuff in the papers about the top 20 postcodes or the worst 20, It really is not helpful when you're trying to make property decisions.
It's always, I laugh about the top 20s and the bottom 20s. There's a suburb in Sydney called Birchgrove. It's a very small suburb. It's on the harbour. It's about 3 kilometres from the CBD. And it has a very diverse makeup of property, and it always makes those lists, always. And that's because it is not a homogenous suburb. And it's small, so it's got a insignificant data set, and yet it always makes it. And every time I see a list, I bet Birchgrove's on there, and I have not actually had I don't know if I call it the pleasure or the displeasure of seeing that Birchgrove has missed the list ever since I've been saying that.
Yep. It is funny how the same ones pop up. It's a bit like my stress, analysis. There's a bit of fighting for the top ones, but in the top 20, you often find the same ones there all the time. and there's some movement over time, but not dramatically so. So it just shows you that you've really got to try and get into...
Understand.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, well, before we get into some of the questions, give us your sort of 2-minute take on what you're actually seeing with regard to the property market. And I guess you cover predominantly Sydney, so we maybe start there, but happy to broaden the conversation too.
Yeah, well, I guess I've got a bit of an unusual sort of portfolio in the sense that Good Deeds Property Buyers is very much Sydney-based. We deal with a 10K radius of the CBD, so inner west, eastern suburbs, and lower North Shore, and so that's quite a unique market and a very stable market in many respects. And then, of course, through Home Buyer Academy, I've got exposure to people buying all across the country, and also suburb help to a degree. And now I'm actually working with buyers agents, mentoring them, right? So I have exposure to other markets, but in terms of my team, we just buy in the inner Sydney ring. And so what I'm seeing in the inner ring is really interesting because, yes, we look at Sydney aggregate property data, and I refer particularly to CoreLogic data because that's and Domain for that matter. But CoreLogic data is certainly gets a lot of noise every month. You look at what the Sydney prices have done or haven't done, and in our local patch, when the market really starts transitioning from one type of condition to another, I like to start tracking individual property resales. And I never fail to be astounded by how many people might buy a property one year and then sell it the next. Like I find that bizarre anyway, but despite all that, I've currently got, and this is without trying too hard, I haven't gone out asking agents to give me listings. I will at some point, but so just preliminary at this stage, 14 properties that had sold last year that have subsequently sold this year or waiting to be sold. So 2 of them, right, 1 still yet to be sold. Of the 14, 12 have sold for more than they sold for last year. 1 sold for less, and that property had sold originally October last year, and at the time we were like astounded at how ridiculously high it was. So even in a hot market, it seemed stupid, like beyond stupid at the time. So there's no surprises there. And the one that's yet to sell, we don't know, potentially could sell for less. But 12 out of those 14 have sold for more. And this is in a market where agents are telling their vendors, you're not going to get what you could have got last year. And it's like, well, actually, you don't have any evidence of that. In terms of, I've got evidence that quite a significant proportion of the resales have been selling at a gain. Now, it might be the price was more, so ultimately the owners may have lost money when it comes into transaction costs, but that's not the point because the transaction costs are not what's counted into the price movement data. It's the actual sale price, right? So I find that very interesting. And even one of those properties was what I call a C grade property, because what we see happen in a slower market, so we call this in fact, I'm calling it a normal market because the clearance rates in Sydney have been sitting between 60 and 65. Now they've just gone very close to 70% in the last weekend. But they've been pretty much sitting in that normal market band, that's the auction clearance rates, since the end of July. And also and they've been creeping up actually. And also the proportion of withdrawn listings has been creeping down. So withdrawn listings is an indication of agent and vendor confidence, and clearance rates, the selling is really an indication of buyer confidence, but also, vendors prepared to meet the market. So it's quite interesting to see that, there is the data shows actually the market's more robust in Sydney than the commentary would say. So it's just looking at different type of data, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at these on sales go, the evidence is thus far, and it's by no means extensive because I've only got 14 examples and these are only in the inner west. So I haven't even gone to the eastern suburbs or North Shore. But still, that's 12 out of 14 properties. And one of them, I was about to say, was a C grade, a really crap property that I wouldn't touch with a barge pole. It sold in April this year and on sold in August this year at a very small, slim gain. It was just over 1%, but still a gain where the official data said prices were falling. So it's an interesting So Cookie Boy said I need to watch anti-sprik videos. I have been watching some of your anti-sprik videos, and I saw the Tasmania and the North Queensland one. I'm only talking about the inner Sydney here. That's all I'm talking about. All I'm talking about, though, is interesting that agents are running around doom and gloom story because they're finding it harder to do their deals.
They're actually working. They're
having to work.
Exactly. Rather than previously, they could just sort of stand on the sidelines and people would just snap it up, right? Easy times. Yeah.
And I have no doubt, far North Queensland is a long way from everywhere. So, it doesn't surprise me what's going on up there. Tasmania even has been inflated by a lot of investor activity in recent years. So to some degree, I'm not surprised there either. I'm not intimately across those markets, so I can't really comment beyond those broad brushstroke comments. But certainly in the inner Sydney market, all I'm doing is just drawing a comparison between what we hear, the official data, what the headlines are, what the agents are saying, and then what I'm seeing. And so when you're talking about you're not going to get what you would have got last year, I think it's more a perception that because in a rising market, everyone thinks their price is going up, and now people have to adjust those expectations, and so it feels like they're falling, but they may not be in all cases. Anyway, just my 2 cents worth on that one.
No, very good, thank you. Well, I wanted to share this with you. This is actually from the Westpac Pulse. They published their monthly pulse today, and I thought it was quite interesting. So I'm just going to read you a couple of... So they started by saying, Australia's housing correction is showing no signs of letting up. Prices and turnover again moving lower since our last report, and declines spreading to more submarkets. That's their sort of headline. And they're basically saying housing is now hostage to the policy and economic cycle, and their overall housing confidence metric, which is their sort of top level one, is down at levels it was last seen in October 2015, right? So that's their composite measure. So that's quite interesting. So from a purely Westpac analytics perspective, that's pretty negative. And they go through and look at sentiment, and they look at all of those macro levels, the auction clearances, the listings rates, the broader inflation, etc., right? And then I thought this was quite interesting. They made the point that company insolvencies are beginning to uptick, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas personal bankruptcies have yet to tick up. And that's something that I've seen in my survey. So some of the forced sales are from the businesses that got caught through COVID and never got out. And now the bankruptcy protection is pretty much removed. So basically that's where some of the leading edge of some of the forced sales are, which I think is quite interesting. So I think generally households and personal bankruptcies are still very low at the moment.
Sorry, just looking at that chart there, it's almost like you got to take out COVID. Because that sort of made an unreal environment. So yes. I guess look at what was the situation pre-COVID and now. It's
sort of coming back to where it was because, of course, during COVID, people were protected from bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Right? Businesses were allowed to trade insolvent. The banks didn't call loans in when they were actually poorly serviced, all those things.
Yeah.
So you're dead right. In a way, this period here is not really that relevant. So you've really got to be looking at here to here, right? Which would say, well, at the moment, insolvencies are still, they're lower than they were, but they're climbing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite interesting. Whereas personal bankruptcies, they're still down. And of course, the CBA data, if we saw that last week, CBA said their delinquency rates are extremely low at the moment. So they're not seeing any evidence in the numbers of people through forced sales. But of course, the other factor is we also know, I see it in my surveys, that some people are making a decision to sell before they get into too deep because they know that their finances are now under more pressure. And that's something else that's in the mix. So there are some people saying, gee, what do I do? Well, maybe I should sell now before prices slide further. And they are being influenced by what you just said, which is agents now saying, you won't get what you got last year.
Yeah,
so they're sort of talking prices down, right?
No, they're talking fear up. That's what they're doing.
Bringing the two. Yeah.
Because agents the sales. I watched this interesting webinar the other day, and it was talking about the sales profitability in agencies was down quite considerably. Mind you, they're only looking against last year, and that was so hot. You know, it's rather annoying actually. I wish they had like 5-year averages. So I think, you know, they're hurting a bit. They're not as profitable as they were. And they need listings, and they need listings to sell in order to keep their cash flow going. And how do you get listings? You know, in an environment where people are not going to necessarily, or they're not confident they're going to get their price. How do you get listings? You have to peddle fear. Somebody has to have a compelling reason to sell if they don't think they're going to get their price, right? Rightly or otherwise, right? So perception is reality. And so, you know, what's your compelling reason? Oh, God, you know, and look, I'm going back to some of these numbskulls, you know, when COVID first hit, and some of the emails I saw coming out of these agents who were 12, like, honestly, they've never seen a property cycle, let alone a recession, you know, telling people that this is it, it's all going to fall off a cliff, you got 50% falls. And Martin, I've heard your forecasts, you know.
Scenarios, not forecasts.
Yes, scenarios. And, you know, even at your worst, they were worse. They're predicting worse than your worst scenario.
I know.
You know, and it's like, you're 12, for God's sake. You've got no life experience. What the hell do you know? Like, you're barely fully grown. Very annoying. And so I find that, and even the smart agents that I actually think about what they're doing, I'm finding them even falling into this trap at the moment. So it's like, just don't take advice from people who are motivated to get you to sell, you know, because they're not charging you for their advice. If they did, perhaps they might actually advise you differently.
That's something worth bearing in mind, that an agent is there to get a deal. That's any price.
They have to,
because that's how they live.
Well, they want you on the hook, right? And I'm not bagging agents here. This is just a fact, right?
But it's worth understanding the motivation.
Absolutely. They want you on the hook, and once you're on that hook, they're going to use every trick in their book to get you to actually sell, right? Because without that, they could be up for a marketing cost, and they could be out of pocket, apart from the fact that they've worked for free. So, and they don't want to work for free. Who wants to work for free? And so that's pretty much the way it works. I mean, for instance, part of what we do in our business is vendor advisory, and obviously that's in Good Deeds. Obviously, the demand for vendor advisory and choosing a good agent and managing that process to make sure this doesn't happen to you is so much more important in a slower market where there's all this sort of doom and gloom and conflicting advice. You need clear-headed advice. You know, it's very hard to be clear-headed when there's so much emotive talk going on everywhere, you know, from headlines right down to the barbecue. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone knows what's going on. And here we go again. I'm going to yawn.
And then, of course, the other point is it's a point in time observation, right? It doesn't necessarily tell you much about what's going to happen, right? Particularly now where there are so many externalities which could go one of two ways.
Well, okay. I'll tell you what's going to happen, right? The market will go down for a while, and then it'll go up again for a while, and it'll go down again for a while, and then it'll go up again for a while, and this is what happens.
Now, that's a very important observation, right? Because there are so many people that I come across, but, you know, even on my one-on-one sessions, who quote the period from 2006-7 up till about 2017 or 2020 and say that only ever goes up, right? They have never seen the down part of the cycle, right? The problem is property markets do go up and they do go down, and they do go up and they do go down.
But they don't go down as far as they went up in the previous boom. And in fact, Domain came out with some research on this, which I thought was very, very interesting. And it went back nearly 30 years over, I think, can't remember how many cycles, maybe 4 in there. And actually there's more than that. There's about 6 cycles in there. And it showed that each downturn was, I've got to try and remember, I think it was roughly the third of duration of the upswing. And it was about 30% of the gain in the previous upswing. Now, I could have my numbers all wrong, but it was consistent that each downturn is shorter, significantly shorter, and significantly less in terms of the loss versus the previous gain, which means that if you're trying to ride out this market, right, no one picks it until it's already happened. So no one picks the bottom until it's past tense. No one picks the peak until it's past tense. Oh, that was the peak. We all know it after we saw it, right? And the problem is that, yes, en masse, prices rise, the market as a whole, but nobody buys the whole market. They don't buy a segment. It's not, you can't buy a residential property ETF, right? You have to buy an individual house or apartment, and you might buy something that goes down in value and doesn't go up. Because that happens, there's still roughly 10%, give or take a bit. Every single quarter in this country sells at a loss. This happens all the time, regardless of when markets are going up or they're going down. If at the height of the last boom, something like 9.8% of properties were still selling at a loss. So, I will say markets overall, the booms are better than the downturns, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't choose a good asset, you won't take advantage of that. And I tell you what, I've seen people have lost money in a rising market. Woohoo! How do you do that? Yep. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it takes an extra skill, doesn't it?
It is. Very clever.
Exactly. Now, let's sort of move the conversation forward a little bit, because I've got a bunch of questions that people sent me before, but this is a really interesting one, and it gets to the heart of when you are thinking about a property transaction, what's driving the decision, right? So this is a family that's living in Australia currently. They own a property here. They've got UK roots, and for various family reasons, they need to go back to the UK, and they're going back long term. So they want to basically sell here, buy in the UK. And they're paranoid about these two property markets moving in different directions. They want to buy roughly similar price and similar type of property in the two countries. But they've got caught up in this, well, maybe we should rent for a bit and see whether property prices in the UK drop a bit. Or, if we sell now in Australia, are we giving away value? And they've got themselves in an absolute doom loop, right?
You've forgotten currency.
Yeah, good point. Yep. Good point. That's a very important element in the mix too, right?
So, doom loop, yeah.
So I don't know what you think, but I think what they've got themselves into is they've got the financial dimensionality of the problem in the center of the mind. And I think they're missing the main point, which is fundamentally a property is somewhere to live and somewhere to grow and live a family with, right?
Yeah.
There's a financial consequence of those decisions, but I get the feeling from the question that they've actually got this on the wrong perspective. But what do you think?
I agree with you. The problem is with trying to work out the market is that you've probably got equal chances of, I would say unequal chances of lucking it and getting it right than you would of totally stuffing it up, because nobody is an expert in the sense that they control the market. You might be able to read the market. You might be able to understand what's happening. I can read the market and understand what's happening, but I can't control it, and I don't know exactly when it'll peak. And that's just here, let alone trying to work out the same wherever they want to buy. And, and then plus then you've got currency to deal with as well. So because none of that is controllable, you have to make decisions based on your needs as a family, right? You have to decide on, what do we want to do? Because you could put all your bets on the Australian property market continuing to fall and the UK will fall more. You could put all your bets on that. If you form your thesis on that and say, right, that's what I'm going to act on, you have to be prepared that you could be totally wrong. And if you only have one asset, you just can't risk it. Like, you just have to make the decision for other reasons, for the right reasons for you as a family. And then the rest just has to fall in line. And whatever happens because you can't control it. So it's tough, and it's really hard, particularly when you've only got one asset. If you had a share portfolio, you could dollar cost average your exit. You can smooth that out. But that's the problem with property, really. It's lumpy.
Horribly lumpy. And you probably, you might have a few properties, but most people have one property.
Yeah.
And the point is that the number of variables that you're trying to solve for, exchange rates, relative income growth, relative property growth in the two areas, the different transaction costs of buying and selling, which is something else that people forget. And by the way, if you buy in the UK and you don't have residence in the UK, you get hit over the head by a 4x2.
Also, their chain system.
Yeah.
Like, who wants to be trying to enter one of those? You want to basically try to be cashed up and not have to, yuck, that's a horrible system. It could all unravel. You get everything perfectly timed and you could get there and the whole thing falls over because 6 months after you bought a property, somebody in the chain falls over.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is not a pretty sight. So my conclusion, I mean, this was, I got permission to actually tell this story because it was a really interesting conversation, and we had a one-to-one that went for an hour and a half as we sort of unpicked all of this. But the net conclusion was that they'd got themselves into a stew about the economics, and they'd lost sight of the fact that this is about a life, this is about a family, this is about somewhere to live. And look, you might win some, you might lose some, but if you're trying to pick what you do to try and just optimize the financials, you've got the wrong agenda.
You miss the point, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
I think it's very good advice, Martin.
We try. We don't always succeed because often, and it's interesting because, and again, I'm not telling tales out of school because I got their agreement to tell this story, but they actually didn't necessarily have the same view. When I sort of
the couple,
the couple, yeah. When I started teasing it out, I realised that the bloke was actually on the numbers, right? The lady of the house, thinking about the kids in the family, was trying to counteract that by talking about these other issues, but she wasn't really being heard. So I ended up more as a sort of a counsellor, right, rather than actually my sort of normal role. But it was a very interesting conversation, and it shows you the complexity that you can get into when these things come along, and when you think about international and everything else. But I think there's an object lesson there even for local transactions too.
I have lots of conversations like that because I do individual strategy sessions with people. I actually don't promote that, even though I just said it on your YouTube channel.
We'll keep quiet about it.
Don't tell anybody. But every now and then I do these personal strategy sessions, and it very much is around, like you say, unpicking is a good one. And what I find though, and it's the same with often with property searches as well with couples, right? You will often find it's like a Venn diagram, and look, I'm going to go heterosexual couples, but not everyone's a heterosexual couple. But let's just do a he and a she because a majority still are. His circle and his requirements are in one side and hers are the other, and in the middle are where they overlap. And it seems to be that the more stressed they are, the more these circles pull apart from each other and the smaller the overlap in the middle. And what I have found from surveying, in this classic heterosexual type scenario where the bloke is the breadwinner, with the big white collar job in the city, and the wife is taking a few years out of her career to look after the kids and they're looking for a family home, is that quite often the bloke is, and I can't even believe we're talking about this in the teens, by the way, that this is still stereotypically quite dominant. But the bloke is very much, I'm going to have to work till I'm 80 to pay for the house. It's big enough for the lifestyle and all the rest of it, so she can swan around drinking coffee and going to the gym. And I sort of get both sides. I do get both sides. I think if anyone, whether it be a man or a woman, is going to be at home with children and take a time out of their career for a period of time, you want to have connection to people and your community. You want that, and you want that at your doorstep, right? Because if you do have a career, you're sacrificing a lot to stay home with little people for a period of time if that's your choice, right? But yeah, the financial burden falls more heavily on one partner. And it is interesting when that stress levels go up, they pull away and they really just, they put up walls around their defending their needs and their desires. So half the role, like you say, is like a counsellor to sort of mediate and get them back on the same page, get them back in the in the center of the, get these circles overlapping more. But and it's amazing how responsive people are if they are in a nice, healthy relationship. It actually really, it's quite amazing how responsive people can be to a little positive intervention.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And I would make another point, and that is that sometimes they try and analyze their way out of it, right?
Because it's scary.
Yeah.
And so, particularly if you're a detail-oriented person, you're going to err to the data to try to justify what is a big, scary decision, So it's like giving them permission sometimes to say that's actually not where the answer lies.
Absolutely. Very interesting. Well, that's why I wanted to have that conversation, because for me, there were a series of life lessons, which I think are quite important. Here's another question for you. So this is actually a first-time buyer in New South Wales, buying in the range where they've now got the choice with regard to the land tax, right? And just to explain for those watching from interstate, up to a certain level, 1.5, I think, right? You can now pick, if you want, to pay the stamp duty up front, or you can not pay the stamp duty and effectively continue to pay every year. Once you've done, the land tax then stays annualized for subsequent sales, so you can't reverse it later.
No, it doesn't.
No,
it doesn't.
Exactly.
That was what they originally wanted to do, but they couldn't get that through.
Okay.
So it does not pass on to subsequent.
Okay. I missed that change. Okay, right. So the next purchaser could switch it back.
If their next purchaser is a first home buyer, they have the option. If they're not a first home buyer, they will not have the option. They have to pay stamp duty. So this is an interesting one. Okay. Can I just say a little bit of a plug? If anyone is a first home buyer and they're trying to work through this, right? On your First Home Buyer Guide podcast, episode 98, Megan and I went through a whole bunch of scenarios in that podcast around talking about how to work out, what's right for you. But one of the things I discovered in that scenario research was there's a really interesting little trick. So basically anything that, roughly speaking, 750K to 1.5, if you're intending on being in it a long time, I mean, you'd have to be there probably 20 years or something before the land tax catches up to the cost of the stamp duty, roughly. That's rough because it's complicated. That's why you should listen to that podcast episode. But if you are going to be a rent investor, or if you think ever that you might rent that property out, it could be the opposite, very costly, and you could be stuck with it. So it's well worthwhile having a run through with your accountant if you think even the slightest idea that you might one day want to rent that property out.
Yeah, because it changes the calculus completely, doesn't it?
Yes, so It goes from I think it's $400 plus 0.3% of the unimproved land value, right?
Yep.
That's if you're going to occupy the property. I think it's 400 plus 0.3. What's interesting is it's the unimproved land value, whereas if you pay stamp duty, you're paying on the purchase price.
Yep.
So if you buy $1 million house or $1 million apartment, right, or $1 million unrenovated house or $1 million renovated house, you are paying the same stamp duty. Whereas if you buy a $1 million dump, your land value is going to be X, depending on where it is. How big's the land? Where is that land located? I've looked at different property sales. One was like $760,000, the other one was like $1 million, and the land value was the same. So it's not tied to your purchase price. And also if you're buying an apartment, there's bugger all land value compared to a house. So, the actual ongoing cost or expectation of cost for land value for your land tax is highly variable and not at all tied to the purchase price. But if you decide you're going to rent it out, that goes from 0.3% to I think 1.5% plus, I can't remember, it's $1,500 I think it is, plus 1.5, top of my head. Anyway, it's significant. And the thing is that if you buy that and pay the stamp duty and that unimproved land value is underneath the threshold, and you might end up not paying land tax at all as an investor for that property in the current regime, in the current setup. So in particular for first home buyers who think they might become investors, that really needs some investigation.
Yeah. And interestingly, of course, what's tended to happen is that where people have gone for the spreading the costs out, it's actually given them a little bit more reach with what they can afford to buy now. So one of the observations is that there's been a little bit of an uptick in some of the property that's actually in that band because of it.
Well, of course.
Funny that.
Exactly. What do you expect? The thing is, though, when you think about it in the whole scheme of things, what do we have? 600 transactions per year, generally speaking, on average year, 600 property transactions in this country. In New South Wales, I wish I knew the number off the top of my head, but we have basically on an average year, we have 100,000. So of those 600,000, 100,000 are first home buyers, right? Now, the proportion in New South Wales, I think it's roughly 50,000 first home buyers in New South Wales per annum. You could probably correct me on that, Martin. So in the whole scheme of things, it's going to impact obviously some prices here, but
it's marginal.
To be honest,
right?
Yeah, it is marginal.
Yeah.
And I also think too that it's probably one of the very few first home buyer schemes that actually does help people who want to buy in Sydney. Most of them, the caps are far too low to be of much use to people wanting to buy in Sydney.
Right, and the final point to make, of course, and the unknown is what the rate of the land tax will be in later years, right? Because there's no guarantee that they won't move it.
No, and also obviously your unimproved land value is going to go up.
Yeah,
so that does go up. It's not the same as sale prices, let's face it, but it will go up. I think they calculate on a rolling 3-year average or something like that. So yeah, it's going to go up, and even if they don't change the rate, it's still going to go up. Just not a lot.
No, not a lot, but still in principle.
Yes.
It could, and they could change the rates as well, just to add insult to injury. So, and
they could.
The difficulty is that you've got no certainty. At least if you've paid up front, you know what you paid, and therefore it's sunk and it's locked, right?
Look, it's true, but the reality is this does help first home buyers to get into the market quicker.
Yep.
And also potentially reduce your lender's mortgage insurance.
Yep.
So there's a number of benefits, and also more cash in the bank if you use that money, if you did have it saved and you keep it as a buffer. So there's lots of good things about it for first home buyers. Also, first home buyers on average don't hold the property that long. If you hold it for 10 years, you're well within most calculations in terms of having to pay it back. In terms of your land tax liability over that 10-year period being more than your stamp duty. So in most cases, you'll find it is, it makes sense to take the land tax option, but you do have to just consider your future use of that property and how long you're going to be in it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, here's another one. This is from Eric, and basically this is to do with granny flats. And basically the question is, why is Veronica anti-granny flats?
I'm not sure if you've heard my analogy, which is putting a granny flat on a lot of the properties that people put granny flats on in order to increase the rent is a bit like sewing an extra leg on a greyhound and expecting it to run faster. So most properties that people put granny flats in the backyard, right, are devalued effectively. They are taking away something that is valuable in that property, and that is a backyard. So if your block is big enough to be able to accommodate a granny flat as well as the main house without compromising too much on outdoor space and privacy and all those sorts of things, then knock yourself out, go and build a granny flat. But if your house is basically just big enough that when you plonk a granny flat at the back, you're staring out the kitchen window right into the wall of the granny flat, that you've compromised. You got to have the front garden, which is used for the front house, and the back garden, what's left of the back garden gets used for the granny flat. Privacy is impacted, all that sort of stuff. You've basically cut down your future buyer for that property to an investor who wants a cash flow positive, potentially investment. Right? So that has narrowed your future buyer pool considerably. You haven't even found someone like yourself, like the value add investor. They've gone out of the mix. There's only one type of buyer, and maybe that family that doesn't want an outdoor space and really wants mum living out the back. So there's a very limited buyer pool, and what you've done is taken away some of the people that would have bought the property beforehand, and you've actually spent money, to add insult to injury, you've spent money to reduce your future buyer pool for that property. So because of that, it's going to impact your growth rate, and it's going to impact your free and easy ability to sell that property in the future. And fundamentally, you've impacted the capital growth in order to get a few extra dollars a week rent. And the rent doesn't compound, whereas capital growth does. And that's where you shoot yourself in the foot.
And Cookie Boy also added, to say nothing of all the parking issues that often are created by lots of people doing this, and they got nowhere to put the cars.
That do. And I love your comment, Cookie Boy. Thank you.
It's a great one. So very fascinating. And I think your analogy is spot on. And yet I can tell you the number of times that my one-on-one conversations, the idea of how can I create more value in the property, which again I sort of often probe. Well,
why do you feel like you have to?
Exactly.
Like if you buy a good asset, I mean, mind you, having said that, right? I put together a video actually, which I haven't actually published yet on Suburb Help website, but mean to one of these days. And what it is, I did some research over 11 properties that had sold and unsold over a 10-year period in New South Wales. So there was a mix of rural, urban, some apartments, some villas and houses in that mix. The one common denominator from the higher performers across and the growth, the nominal growth, right, before I sort of really got in there and worked out how much money had been spent on renovations and whatever. The nominal growth ranged from over this 10-year period, 64%, I think, to 400% or 396%. So huge difference. So somebody only got 64% return over 10 years, whereas others got nearly 4 times, right? So just over half to 4 times. Big difference, right? Now, the 4 times was actually a rebuild. So let's take that back, knock it back. But the best performers tripled their value. So it's possible that somebody could only get half of their money back, or 0.6%, and someone else could triple their value over the same 10-year period, right? And so it's really interesting looking into, well, what are the factors? What makes one property do so well and something else do so badly? The common denominator actually was value add. But you got to value add in the appropriate way, right? And putting a granny flat on and ruining, value add is adding something, not literally adding something, but adding something that makes that property more appealing, right? I reckon a 3-legged dog would run faster than a 5-legged dog, by the way, smooth operator. But so your value add means making the property better, right? Not getting more rent necessarily. Getting more rent isn't necessarily making it better. And often when you make it better, you can get more rent, but maybe not quite as much as that. But anyway, so that's why I don't like granny flats in most cases.
Thank you. I think they wanted to hear your long run on granny flats because they knew that this was going to be a good conversation point.
My rant.
That's great. But points so well made. And again, I sometimes come back to this question about, what is the property there for? What are you trying to achieve? And again, it goes back to this. If you're driven by that financial return angle, well, you're going to make some interesting decisions, but not necessarily good decisions.
Yeah.
Right?
It's getting the metrics right. Yeah. It's, and this is the thing when you look, if you're going to invest, you want to get a return. Otherwise, why bother doing it? But people are chasing the wrong returns. They don't understand the magic of compounding. And really what is at the core of that is buying an asset that lots of people are going to want in the future, right? So anything you can do to increase the types of buyers or the amount of buyers or the appeal of that property, that's what you want, right? As opposed to increasing the rent. because that is not necessarily increasing the appeal of the property. And I've done case study after case study after case study on this over the years, and I can it sticks out like dog's balls. Just to continue that theme.
Plenty of doggy-related conversations. And for those of you watching, I had a three-legged dog who.
Do you?
I did have a three-legged dog, Winston. That was a Labradoodle, and for about 5 years he went around quite happily with 3 legs, having got cancer on the 4th. And I tell you, he could go faster than a 4-legged dog in the right direction. Couldn't turn very easily, but once he got going, boy, I took him down the road once one evening, and he saw a possum, and he was off, and he beat the other dog to the possum, so with 3 legs. So.
What did you say your other dog's name is? Did you say Luna?
Yeah, so currently I've got Luna and Meteor. That
is bizarre, because that little dog that you saw earlier before we went live is named Luna. We've got a Luna too.
Oh, it's a great name for a dog. Luna, my Luna was actually from a farm, and she was called Luna. The other one was called Meatball, but we couldn't have a dog called Meatball, so we tried to find a sort of a similar sounding name and thought, Luna, Meteor. So that's how we ended up with Meteor. So
fabulous.
Yeah. Now, here's an interesting one. This is from Clara. It's about high-speed internet. Is high-speed internet or low-speed internet enough of a determinant to actually shape a potential sale or not? Or is it marginal?
I can only go on anecdotal evidence, right, that, yes, it is. Because particularly with the work from home, the change to working patterns and even hybrid working from home. And so anecdotally, I've heard that it is. So can't speak to any evidence or research that I've read, only anecdotally. But that's assuming that people pay attention and check, right? If they don't know, then it's not going to impact, is it? It's only they're going to find out afterwards. So it's a good question to ask if you're moving to an area where you suspect it might have an issue.
Yeah, and the point there is that even if you've got high potential capacity, it may not come to your particular premise because you may not have got fibre to the premise.
Yes, fibre to the node? Fibre to the
node, yes. I had fibre to the node when I first started doing shows. It was horrendous, so I ended up having fibre to the premise, and it was a huge change. My theory is that if you've got high-speed internet and you're looking to sell the property, shout it from the rooftops.
Yes.
Because actually it can be a significant attractor.
100%. I would definitely shout it from the rooftops.
Yeah. And often my experience also is that agents don't often recognise it as a potential additional positive to put on the details. So I always say to people, if you're in the happy situation where you've got high-speed internet available, broadcast it from the rooftops, because it can make quite a difference. For many people, if they're working from home or if they've got a large family with lots of internet users all on the same time, it's a difference between a peaceful evening and a non-peaceful evening, so it can be quite important.
We just imagine if we have another pandemic, and it's quite likely.
Yeah, well,
apparently
it is unfortunately looking more likely.
You get locked in again with all your kids and the whole palaver. You want high-speed internet.
Yeah. And it's interesting. There was an interesting one from Jason. I was going to put that one up. Just 1 second. Flick that and then that. He said, I thought perhaps access to reasonable internet is a factor. Look at Sorrento and Victoria, fibre to the node with no upgrades to fibre to the premise available at the moment. Internet is an essential service. I agree with that. It is for many people. Yeah. And that's why I'm making the point that I actually think it is a very relevant question to ask. So if you're buying, do the research. You can, of course, look up the property address and see what the best available service is if you go to the NBN's sort of lookup system. And then if you're on the other side of it and you actually got high speed, make sure it's on the details, because it can make quite a difference. All right, now this is one up your street, Veronica. Buyer's agents. This is from Sam. He said, I've used buyer's agents twice in my last few years. The first time, it was a really good experience. The second time, it was an horrendous experience. Are there any regulations relating to buyer's agents? What is their role? What should their role be? And how does anybody check up to see whether they do what they say they do?
Oh, do we have another hour and a half for me to rant about this one? Okay. No, yes and no. Okay. Here's a problem. We have a real problem with buyer's agents, and I am one, and I'm an advocate for people using them. However, I'm also an advocate for buyer's agent upskilling, and I'm an advocate for consumers need to understand how to choose between a good one and a bad one, because there is too many crap buyer's agents out there. The reason there are too many crap buyer's agents out there is because there's a lot of myths around about how glamorous being a buyer's agent is. And I think there's a whole crop of new television shows that's not going to do any favors here, right? And, I'll put my hand up for probably contributing to this myth. You're swanning around looking at lovely homes and then just do a deal and bang, and everyone loves you, right? That is nothing like the role of a good buyer's agent. Now, so that's sort of the perception, I guess, around a lot of people that are entering into the industry. And then you've got a licensing regime across the country, which is woefully substandard, is not fit for purpose. The licensing process that a buyer's agent needs to go through is basically they need to become a real estate agent. And in order to do that, they will learn all about how to sell property and how to lease it, rent it out, and property managing. They won't learn pretty much jack shit about being a buyer's agent. And in New South Wales, for instance, there is a module elective module that people can choose to do, which is fantastic. But all the compulsory subjects have got really very little relevance to a buyer's agent. So what that means, and in New South Wales and in ACT, you now need, in recent times this has changed, you now need 2 years experience before you can run your own business. But prior to that, you could get your license, set up shop straight away, right? In Victoria, you need a year's experience, and then you can get your higher grade license and set up shop, but you actually need some work experience. That's great. Other states and territories, you can get your license where you've done no learning whatsoever about the skills required to be a buyer's agent, and then you go and set up shop. Now, the problem with that, the last boom that we had, was that so many consumers were trying desperately to get into the marketplace, and they're thinking, I know my secret weapon's going to be a buyer's agent. Every good buyer's agent was basically at capacity. And so there was an opportunity, stripe a cat, way to go. There was an opportunity there for all these new entrants to get into the industry and start earning money from day one, because people were desperately trying to get an edge in this market. And when you're so desperate, FOMO's going crazy. These people were getting business, and they shouldn't have been getting business because so many of them don't know what they're doing. Now, for Suburb Help, I actually put together a database of buyer's agents across the country who I've interviewed myself, and I've looked for references and all that sort of stuff. And, I can, in one call, I can start getting the antennas going off as to whether someone's going to be anywhere near any good or not, right? And at one extreme, I'll be talking to buyer's agents that are local specialists. They're well embedded in their area. They understand the pros and cons of property in their area. They know how to identify a good property. They've got their client's best interest at heart. They will do all the relevant due diligence. At the other end of the scale, we've got people who've done their license. They've decided it's a glamorous industry and yeehaw, I want to give up my day job. And I love property. And they don't know the first thing about due diligence. They don't know the first thing about actually how to do the job. Sales agents think they're a laughing stock and will run rings around them. But at the other end of that, the worst experience call I had was with a person who's in Queensland, in a regional area, in an area where there's not, I don't know whether there's much call for buyer's agents, but establishing a business and a marketplace there, supposedly educating people as to the benefits of using a buyer's agent and the rest of it, had zero experience, had done a fancy course as well as the license. And I said to him, that's great. So tell me about your due diligence process. And he said, oh, well, I don't believe anything that an agent says. I said, well, that's cool, but what's your due diligence? I can say due diligence process. Well, I don't, didn't know what to say. And I said, okay, do you want me to explain to you? Queensland is the state in Australia where there's the least amount of vendor disclosure. So therefore, it's up to you as a buyer's agent to get a whole host of documents and information to be able to present to your client a case for or against that property and whether there's any risks associated with it or not, and whether there's development risks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And also to do the pricing research to make sure you're not just pressing a button on CoreLogic to flick out an AVM to say what you should pay for it. There's an entire process you need to go through. How have you gone about putting that together? He was struck dumb because he didn't know what I was talking about. That was the most horrific phone call I had. So the person that wrote in saying had one great experience and then one shit experience, unfortunately, the great experience probably set them up expecting to have another great experience. And then if they had it the other way around, they would have only ever used one buyer's agent. And the problem is that we have legislators, or we have regulators, I should say, and there's all this movement around don't over-regulate us. Well, actually, we need to be regulated, because when you don't have regulation, you've got people that have no experience, have not learned anything, none of the skills, and yet they qualify to be a buyer's agent and put their name on the door and start charging people money to do the job. And they don't even know what's involved in the job. So, yeah, I don't know. The regulators don't seem to review it importantly enough to recognize the risks. And I really do not understand what is so hard about that, but they don't.
No.
Yeah.
It is interesting. And my conversation with people who are thinking about, well, if I use a buyer's agent, surely that gives me an advantage, to which I reply, it depends.
It does depend.
Right? You might get an advantage, but you might not. You might be paying extra money for no good reason. So at least ask some hard questions of a buyer's agent. So what are the 2 or 3 critical questions that somebody who might be thinking of using a buyer's agent should ask of that agent before they engage?
Well, look, for starters, this is why we put together Suburb Help, was partly to help people by narrowing down a list of buyer's agents that we could be confident to recommend that they can't pay to be on. They've got to pass my bullshit test. Now, in my bullshit test, so you can go to Suburb Help and send us an inquiry if you want to. But if you want to pass your own bullshit test, you ask them about the due diligence process. The problem is that you need to know what they should be telling you. So you need to learn what needs to be done. So that's the first thing. The second thing is explain to me your local specialization, because you do not want one of these fly in, fly out buyer's agents. I mean, I've heard stories that make your hair curl, right? Buyer's agents, not even looking at properties and sending some local, in another state, sending a local property manager to inspect it for them. Give me a break. It's just so recalcitrant. So, I want everyone to understand you need to get a local specialist, right? And if you don't get a local specialist, you run the risk of somebody is just does not understand the drivers of that local market. You're not necessarily going to buy a good asset in that area, right? So that's the first thing. Due diligence, the local specialization. You want to know what sort of properties they've been buying in that area. And really cast a critical eye on those. Ask for evidence. What have you been buying? And the other thing you can do, you can call local agents and sales agents. The problem is that's a bit difficult there, because some buyers agents will pay local agents referral fees, and so they're going to be biased. So you have to be careful about that. The other thing that you can do is, there was one other thing I was going to suggest. You want to talk to, ask them for a list of everything they bought and randomly pick 3 properties and ask to talk to those clients. Don't let them give you the clients that they want to give you if they offer you to be reference checked, right? So that's another thing you can do.
Yeah, and the object lesson there is, if you're going down that route, you got some tire kicking to do. You can't just assume because it says buyer agent on their on their chest, as it were, that they're actually automatically qualified and appropriate and will do you a good job. That's the key message, I think, out of that one.
And this is why I've started, I think do you mind if I talk about the mentoring program?
Yeah, no,
that I've
go
just been
for
piloting?
it.
Right,
yeah.
So literally last night I delivered module 12 of a 12-module program, which is now going to be a 12-month program for new and almost buyer's agents. So wannabes that are doing the licensing course and new buyer's agents, because there's this huge problem with people that are attracted to the industry because they like property. They might even like people, which I think is pretty important, just quietly. And then they go and do the course and then they're stuck because they're like, I know that this course hasn't taught me what I need to know. I do want to do a good job and I don't know where to go. I don't know where to turn. And it's really hard to get a job in an industry with a high proportion of micro businesses as well, that aren't sort of, hiring necessarily. And also people who do hire want, even an associate or a trainee, they actually want someone with experience, even for a trainee role. So it's really difficult to get into getting mentoring and getting, part of the problem, with the licensing situation where you can go and get your license and go and set up business. A lot of the reason people do set up business is because they can't actually get a job with a decent buyer's agent. So it's a real problem entering the industry. And that's the reason that I've put together this program, and I'll be launching it properly next year to help people actually learn the skills they need to do the job properly. And that actually will make them more, I guess, employable as well if they don't want to set up their own business. But if they are trying to set up in New South Wales or ACT or Victoria, they don't have the option. They're going to have to work for someone else, and that's a good thing. But they also need to take along a bunch of skills, so that give them an advantage there. But it's a really difficult business to get a nice, clear pathway into it if you want to be a good buyer's agent.
Yeah, absolutely. A good one is the critical thing. Thanks for that. So there you go. That was, I think, the person who asked the question was luckier the first time, not lucky the second time.
Yeah,
right?
And I'm so sad to hear that. It's, to pay somebody, right, to do a worse job than you could have done yourself is just shocking. And it happens a lot.
It does, unfortunately. Now, Jason asked this question. Is it possible that buyers... I can't read it there. Let me just put it here so I can see it. Is it possible buyer's agents go and do a deal with a seller's agent to achieve more money in their pocket? Aren't a lot of real estate agents in it for the money and will play between the buyer and the seller to the best advantage for them, i.e. don't represent the seller or the buyer? Well, that's getting into a very significantly deep question about who's working for who.
Okay. This is all about follow the money, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's look at sales agents just for a minute. A sales agent is paid by the vendor, right? So you would think that their loyalty should be with the vendor, except for one very critical thing.
Yes.
That vendor, it's a commission, not a fee for service.
Yep.
And it means that the vendor only pays them when and if they sell. And so that sales agents, everything that they do has to get a deal across the line. And you would think that's going to be at the best possible price, the highest possible price. And many of them do. But at the end of the day, what's more important is a sale, because they need to get paid. Pardon me. So that's the sales agent's motivation. A buyer's agent, if they are charging a fee in the same way a sales agent does, i.e. a commission, and it's paid only if they buy, they've got the same problem. That buyer's agent is motivated to get that person to buy come hell nor high water. They're not interested in the price that you pay. They're not interested if it's a good asset. They just want you off their books so they can get their money. So how you pay someone is very, very important. Now, there's lots of different models in the buyer's agency space. We, like, for instance, in Good Deeds, we a fee for service, and we charge a fixed fee, right? It's not a percentage. Some buyer's agents charge a percentage. A lot of other ones will also charge a fixed fee. Some will say it's a percentage, but we'll fix it. And I'm like, well, why? Anyway, it's just annoying. Why complicate it? So, and then there's people that will have a nice big opening fee, so like an engagement fee, and it's significant, right? And then there's others that charge you $1,000 and the rest of it when you actually commit to a property? Well, you've got to think, well, what are they motivated to do? They're motivated to get payday, right? So you want someone who charges a reasonable engagement fee. You want I charge a monthly retainer as well. It's still a fixed fee. They only pay the same amount of money at the end of it. But the incentive is taken away to be thinking, I need payday. I need cash flow in the business. And I don't think that way anyway. But look, let's face it, humans are what humans are. So that is a temptation, right? So I've taken that right out. That's in my business. So everyone's a bit different. So in terms of this collusion, I guess the question sort of it infers there could be collusion at times. There are some agencies that do collude. There's no doubt about that. But generally speaking, it's not as neat as that. Generally speaking, it's hard to line up exactly the buyer's agent having the exact right clients at the same time as the selling agent having the exact right properties for those clients. So I wouldn't think that there's too much of that going on, although I do know that there are some sales agents that are selling their open house lists to buyer's agents who then, go and cold call these people, which personally I think is a breach of privacy. I can't imagine anyone actually signing an agreement to say, oh yes, I'll let you take my name and number, then sell it on to somebody else. So there are some little deals that sort of get done like that. There are some buyer's agents that are very transactional in their approach, and there are some sales agents that are equally transactional and are not necessarily focused on the best outcome for their vendor. And when those two get together, they're just going to do a deal that gets a deal done. I've seen plenty of buyer's agents pay way too much money for property because it's easy for them. I don't know how they pitch it to their clients. I don't know how they sell it to their clients, but the sales agents tell me stories. So it does happen, right? And it shouldn't happen, but it does. So that's another reason to talk to sales agents. I guess if they're going to bag out any buyer's agents, you want to know if they're going to bag out the one you're about to use. But once again, they may not tell you, so it's tricky.
And the concept of following the money and understanding people's motivations, because people, frankly, are coin operated, right?
Yeah, so not all.
No,
not you and me, Martin.
No, well, that's true. Not everybody, but
most.
Some are, and unfortunately quite a few in the industry are. So you need to understand that. And I always say to people, go in with an open mind, but make sure you got your filters on. Make sure what you're doing is actually thinking about, well, why are they telling me this, right? What's really going on here, right? So step back a little bit. And actually, I think that's a really, that idea of stepping back and just thinking about, well, hang on, what's going on here is really important, because you get sucked into it and you sort of,
yes,
sometimes it becomes an emotional thing rather than actually a logical thing. And to my mind, it's really important to just keep that balance in train.
Absolutely. And you also got to remember, sales agents, more so than buyer's agents, do a lot of training on dialogue, heaps of it, right? Now, you hang around them enough, you start hearing the same thing over and over again. You go, right, I know what they mean when they say that, right? That's what's what we do. We interpret. That's one of our jobs, right, for our clients. So sales agents will run rings around a lot of buyer's agents in terms of dialogue, and they'll also run rings around buyers, individual buyers, because they haven't heard all the lines like the way we have, right? And so, so you got to be very mindful of all that going on. There was a point I was going to go with that, and it'll come back to me. Anyway, I've lost my train of thought because I was looking at some of the messages coming up. How often does it happen, the collusion and buying the open house list? The other thing, off markets, right? Okay. So this is, most buyers agents go, oh, well, this is my value add. I'll save you time, I'll save you money, and I'll get you access to off markets. And it's like, yeah, good. We all get access to off markets. I've heard sales agents say to me, I save all my off markets up for XYZ buyers agents because they're not discerning. And they'll sell that idea of the off-market and the exclusivity and the scarcity to their unsuspecting clients. They'll pay too much, and I won't even give you that shit, Veronica, because I know that you and your team won't even look at it. Now, I've had a number of agents say that to me over the years, right? So that's what you got to be careful. So when the buyer's agent is banging onto you about, oh yeah, I'll get access to 80% of what I buy is off market, rah rah rah. It's like, well, really? I want to look at the whole pot. I want to look at everything that's available for sale because I really want to assess whether that's a really good off market and whether it's a reasonable price, or if it is at a premium, should I pay it because it's so unique to what I need, or am I falling for this sort of magic of the hidden market and getting something that nobody else gets access to? And am I paying for something that's actually bullshit? And that happens. And that is very alarming. And I guess, so, as I said, start me on this rant and I go off and on and on and on. One of the other things I would say as well, put on your list, are you a member of REBA? Now, not every member of REBA is amazing, right? And not everyone who's not a member is not amazing. But the next question to ask is, did you go to the last conference? Because I have to say, and I was there, that generally speaking, there weren't many people at that conference that I thought I wouldn't feed, right? So there weren't many people there that I wouldn't rate. Now, there are a few, but the vast majority of people that went to that conference I thought were ethical, really focus on their clients' best interests, really spend time and energy investing in their own skills and keeping up to date, and I think will do fundamentally a good job. I would say 95% of the people who were there. So if you want to filter down, that'd be a really good filter. Are you a member of REBA? Did you go to the conference? So you can know then and then ask the other questions and you can make your mind up. I think you've got a fairly good chance.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And, I actually think that in some cases, doing it yourself is a good way to do it because at least you get to know what's really going on. But if you haven't got the time or in the wrong location, a good buyer's agent can take some of the heavy lifting off. But you've got to be careful, you've got to be picky, and you've got to ask the right questions.
Yep.
All right, here's another question. This is from Julie. Here's an interesting conundrum. £1 million, which we want to put into property, investment property.
Pounds.
It's £1 million. Coming in from the UK.
Yeah, right.
So presumably,
so is that $3 million now? I don't know what's the exchange rate.
I think it's 0.56. So it's getting over to, let's say, 2 million Aussie, right?
Right.
Question is, for an investment portfolio, when we're thinking sort of 5 to 10 years, she's saying we're confused about whether we should go for 2 or 3 apartments or whether we should go for a house. Because, of course, you're going to have to pay a lot more for a house but it's all in one place. You could actually buy 3 apartments and you could spread the risk, or you could buy 3 apartments in the same block and, how would you go about unpicking that problem if you were... So, you've got nothing to sell. You've got this money in the bank and you're looking to build a investment portfolio. It's actually in the Sydney locale.
And is that their budget, or have they gone and worked out whether they can also borrow some money?
It's the money they've got. So I guess they could borrow against it or mortgage it or, yeah.
Yeah. And so obviously so step one for me would be to get some financial advice in terms of, A, your borrowing capacity, B, taxation implications, C, the period of time over, you want to, what's your plan? I mean, why property, I guess, is a question as well, to say, because to me, and obviously I'm not able to advise in any other category of investment other than property. But property is what we call a lumpy investment, right? And it is something that you buy, in my view, not so much for income, maybe in the future, to provide income, but you're buying it for capital growth. It's the one asset that you can borrow, you can leverage to it to a great degree. You can, you can, what else was I going to say there? I can't remember. Anyway, the point being that you get a woeful yield on it. And if you're getting a really good yield, you're going to get a woeful capital growth. And why risk all of that money for woeful capital growth, right? You can diversify in other investment classes a hell of a lot better with good financial advice than you can in property. So therefore, if you're going to take the risk of putting all your eggs in one or two or three baskets, then you need to basically focus on capital growth. Otherwise, why bother? That's the first thing. So when you're going to say, right, well, I want to go and find out my borrowing capacity, look at my long-term plan. 5 years is not long enough. You really need to have at least a 10-year horizon, I believe, in order to properly invest in property. And then when you know exactly the size of the pool, and you might, when you get some financial advice, decide that you're going to invest some of that in property and the rest in shares or something else, right? And then when you know what your allocation is to invest in property, it's then about working out, well, what's the best allocation of that, right? So if you came to me with $2 million in Sydney and said, right, I want to buy a house, and that's it, right? One property, it's a house. Well, yes, we can find something for you that's going to be investment grade, within the 10K radius. And I would say try to stay in as close to the CBD as possible, right? In this blue chip area as possible, right? If you said to me, I had $1.5 million and I want to buy a house, I'd be like, ooh, we can, but you're going to get like a B or a C grade house, and you could actually, for the same sort of money, buy a really good apartment, a cracker apartment. And I could show you examples last 10 years where a really shitty house has underperformed compared to the cracker apartment. So that's one of the scenarios, right? If you had 3 million cash, you might go, well, I would put it in, I definitely would diversify, but I'd be looking at A-grade property across the board. Would I buy a house and an apartment? Or how would I do that? And how would I diversify? And I'd have to have a conversation with my accountant about land tax obligations as well, because you think, okay, well, if I was going to diversify, would I do one in Melbourne? Would I do one in Sydney? If I was going to do an apartment, I'd be more inclined to do Sydney than I would anywhere else, to be quite frank, because apartments have not performed well elsewhere, really. Even good apartments haven't performed particularly well in Melbourne. We're still waiting for, I don't know what to happen there. Whereas in Sydney, if you pick the eye teeth out of it, you can do very well and really pick an A-grade asset with an apartment. And a lot of that's because of affordability or unaffordability. So that's a bit of a rant as well. Sorry about that. Hopefully that gives some clarity as to, really the order in which you need to get some advice.
Yeah, and it wasn't a rant. I think you made some excellent points there, because it is not straightforward. But I guess my observation is this. There's often the case of when you're thinking about the investment, you're not thinking about the ongoing running costs of maintaining the investment. And if you've got 3 small apartments, all of which are going to have to probably pay ongoing fees just to keep the apartment running, right?
Well, I'm going to hit you. Look, I'm interrupting, I know.
No, you carry on. Yeah.
I'm guessing you're going to say that the ongoing costs of an apartment are going to be higher.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we should make sure that you do that part of the calculation as well.
Yeah.
So basically, the costs of the governing entity, the sinking fund for the repairs and all of those things, you have to incorporate those into into your thinking.
When you're buying an apartment, there's a whole extra layer of due diligence that needs to be done. Absolutely. Now, the thing though, and I look at my own investments, the costs are roughly, in percentage-wise, in terms of percentage of income, are roughly the same, house and apartment. And that's because houses, all the maintenance is on you, whereas strata levies is a budgeted form of, maintaining and insuring that property and running that property. So, and also typically yield on apartments is slightly better than on houses as well. So it's sort of, in terms of the percentages, comes out in the wash. And I think if you're starting off with a big chunk of cash, particularly if you're a bit more mature, and you don't want to sort of borrow heaps and have this huge dint in your cash flow. You want to enjoy life, right? Especially if you've got a nice big chunk of money there. You think, I'll borrow enough so that I'm having a higher exposure to the property market, so that my investments has got my snowball's bigger, right? But I won't borrow so much that I have a cash flow problem. You can do that. And that's why getting that financial advice at the beginning to sort of model those things out, it's really important. So you can determine, well, where am I comfortable? Where am I in my life? What are my goals? And so therefore, how is this going to serve me in that? And the problem with property is that it's a great thing for really young people, but it's also a difficult thing for really young people because getting into the market is really tough. But if you can get into it when you're young with good assets, not shit assets, then you've got 20, 30, 40 years runway. Then you start divesting of property. But when you're getting closer to retirement age, you do need to have other assets in your pool. Maybe you've got a big super balance, but you do have to have other assets because the problem is that you get to, you've had a property for 10 years, say, and then you go to retire, you probably still got a chunk of debt on it. And, and that's when you've got to start working out, well, how am I going to reduce the debt? What am I going to do? What's my plan there? So, and that's why it's really important to really work those things out before you commit to a property, because once you are committed, you can't sell a bedroom to free up a bit of cash.
That's very true. And I just want a quick point on the superannuation end of things. There are, of course, limits on superannuation when you actually move from the accumulation to the extraction phase. It's 1.7 million, I think, was the last time I looked. Which basically means that anything above that, you can't actually use it. You've actually got to commute it. And so there's a whole bunch of questions about the way that you've got your superannuation structured and the value and the volume of that. So you cannot make an investment decision on property without having a canvas which includes the other elements. I think that's sort of the key first point.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, easy to say, tough to do, but it's really important to have a plan.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that if you've got that much money, right, then you've got something to plan with.
Yes, that's right.
As opposed to early on in life, when you're early on in your career, and this is a real problem because something like 50% of financial planners left the industry in the wake of the Royal Commission when they increased the educational requirements for financial planners. A lot of experience left the industry. You can have your arguments as to whether they're too lazy to get a degree or not. I don't know. There's experience left the industry. And so it's really difficult for people who don't have a significant amount of money now or a significant income now to get access to good financial advice. But if you've got a big pot of money like that, well, I would expect that financial planner is probably going to be interested in talking to you. So you just got to find a good one of those and find someone who understands property and will talk to you about property in the whole scheme of things. Because the problem is that they view that, say, it's not a financial product, I can't talk to you about it. And then you sort of cast adrift. And that's not the answer either.
And I just made one of the points which I was going to make. There are very few financial planners, in my view, who puts property on the same tier as other market investments and actually have a holistic view, which includes the property portfolio and the other investment classes. The number of times I've spoken with people in my one-on-ones where they've got really bad advice because they didn't include the property bit in the story. It was like, property's over there, we'll just leave that, we'll do the rest of it, right?
So even their own home, it's such an important part of our whole plan. It's so ridiculous.
I know.
Yeah.
It is. It's quite amazing, but that's another weakness in the advice sphere in Australia. Well, we're close to the end, but I just wanted to come back to Westpac again, and I wanted to show you this. This is actually the Westpac report again, which came out today. I wanted to give you. They're saying New South Wales leading the way lower is their summary of New South Wales, right? Victoria, no let up in sight. Queensland, prices drop despite tight supply. Western Australia, still holding up well. South Australia, stalling but not falling. Tasmania, looking badly rattled. And the territories like NT slowing and the ACT prices are cracking. Now, it's interesting when Westpac is at least trying to actually tease out some differences down at the state level, right? Which is what you and I have been saying for quite some time. You have to go granular. The point I guess I want to ask you is how granular is granular?
It's not granular enough.
No.
They've got Northern Territory and ACT on the same line, for God's sake. I mean, what does that say? That says to me, throw the whole thing out. The ACT has been one of the big performers in recent times. And Northern Territory, I don't know, I can't comment on that. But I have to tell you, well, actually, I'll comment on the Darwin apartment market because I do believe the last time I looked, the prices were still lower than they were 10 years ago. So whereas the ACT housing market went gangbusters, and in fact, I think did the median price pip Sydney at one point?
At one point it did, yep.
Yeah, there you go. So how could you have those two on the same line?
Yeah, I know. And the reason for sort of putting that out there was that I get really frustrated with these sorts of reports, right? Because they sort of look all authoritative, and they sort of, say, well, here's a page or two on New South Wales, here's a page on Victoria, right? As though somehow they've got a definitive view, right? And I can point to falls of property values. Look at my anti-spruce. For example, in Western Australia and in South Australia, there are examples where property prices are being significantly cut, right? There are others where they're not, but you can't go at this high level view, state level view. You have to go really, really, really local. And then you have to look at the types of property, the stars and the dogs and all of those things to really get a view. I am of the belief that in the current environment, it's ever more critical to go local.
100%. 100%. And because even like if you look at, say, CoreLogic data, they'll have Sydney and then rest of New South Wales. Like that's statistically accepted, right? Brisbane, rest of Queensland.
Yeah.
Okay, that means you're comparing Mackay and Southport.
Yep.
Very different markets. Or Gympie and, I don't know, Dalby, Texas. There's a place called Texas in Queensland. Do you know that?
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous, and you can't draw any conclusions from any of that. And the other thing too, I mean, I don't know. I haven't met the people in Westpac's economics team. Maybe I should, but. We have interviewed on the Elephant in the Room. We've interviewed Felicity Emmett from ANZ, and we've also interviewed Belinda Allen from CommBank, both senior economists. Really in a quest to understand, what they're looking at when they're coming out with their predictions and their property market commentary, and they are approaching it not from the market, right? So they're approaching it at a macro level with lots of different inputs. And it's interesting stuff because this stuff does have an impact. But the problem is it's the behavioural elements on the ground. That's what makes the market do what the market does. It's all reactions, and so confidence, I think Westpac's confidence, consumer confidence, or the housing confidence index is quite useful because that's more about attitudes of people. Right. And even at the moment, all the confidence indexes, like consumer confidence, is way down. And yet we can't rein in inflation because people are still spending money. So we might not be confident, but we're still spending.
Yep.
So there's all these measures, but the actual behavior, that's what we need to be looking at, because that's really what makes the market go up or down.
Yeah. Well, one of the things in my surveys is the Financial Confidence Index series, which is trying to get those attitudinal points, right? Because I actually think that's at the moment the most critical things. It's what people are thinking and what they're planning to do, which then translates into some of my other modelling. But you can't do macroeconomics down on this stuff. That's the problem. It's the wrong way. You can bubble it up perhaps from the bottom, but yeah.
You know what I love though. I mean, and I was reading about this only recently. It says the best forecasters will always adjust their forecasts. And I'm like, so that just means that the best forecasters are just admitting that they're trying to, make a call with imperfect information, and then they're constantly tweaking it as they get more information, which basically means that their forecasts are shit, because the minute they get more information, they're going to tweak it again. And so by the very process which makes them good is actually admitting that the process is a waste of time.
Yes. RBA, please note, because they're the worst of it, right, in terms of their expectations.
Well. And all those poor buggers that, that took note of what Phil Lowe said about not raising rates till 2024. And let's face it, it sounds very credible, and the RBA comes out and says they're not going to do something. And people did act with confidence as a result of that.
And, then he goes and retrospectively says, no, I didn't really say that, right? Well, sorry, Phil. At the time, I've got evidence from real people that they took him at his word and made decisions based on what he said. So that's a very
I
important.
believed him. I'm pretty cynical.
I
thought, God, he's. I thought if the governor of the RBA says that, well, hey,
Yeah, indeed.
You know more than me, though. That's why you didn't believe him.
Well, I don't know about that, but I go off the ASX 30-day forward implied, right, which is saying 3.7% in April 2024 at the moment as a cash rate.
Interesting.
If that's anything like true, then rates are not coming down anytime soon, and that means that we're going to be actually in for a long, slow grind rather than a quick, drop. So it could be an uncomfortable ride, which is why you've got to make important choices on more than just the financials, why you've got to go granular, and why if you're going to pick people to help you, buyers agents or whatever, make sure you pick them on the right basis rather than actually just because I'm too busy, I'll get somebody else to do the work. No, you need to be a bit better than that. We are, believe it or not, out of time. If people want to find out more about you and your services, where do they go? So many different places.
Well, no, I've narrowed it down. I've got one now. They can go to veronicamorgan.com.au. That's simple. Everything's there. I've updated it. I've upgraded it. So because I was just like, if you want this, you want that, blah, blah, blah. You can find everything I'm up to and everything that I'm working on that really ultimately helps consumers get access to better advice so they can make better decisions. All the directions point from that one website.
And I reckon that over the years, the trajectory of our sort of thinking is continuing to sort of go like that, because that's what I'm about too, trying to help people make better decisions, right? Because it's so critical, particularly in the current environment. So, well, thank you. I will update the footnotes in the show so that people can just go there. I will just share this with you, because I did actually put a poll up. New South Wales stamp duty allows some buyers to pay per year rather than at purchase. So is it a good move? 13% said good move. A bad move, 48%. 10% said it makes for little difference, and 29% said it's just political, and we got 163 votes on that. So there you go. That's a little bit from the audience. They're a little bit sceptical of the New South Wales move.
So do they mean good move or bad move for buyers or for the government?
The way I was looking at it from the point of view of the person buying, but maybe that's not how they answered it. So maybe I didn't ask the question clearly enough.
Sort of throw a spatter in the works. Well, who knows what will happen? There's an election in March, and if the Labor gets in, I think they're making noise. They'll throw it out.
Yeah, no, exactly right. We could be all going again. Well, Veronica, I want to say thank you so much. I always enjoy speaking with you because you've always got such potent and important views. Very much, around how people make better decisions. So thank you very much for your time. I will put the links and things below, and we should do it again sometime down the track when things will be different. I don't know how different, but they'll be different.
They'll be different but the same. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me on, Martin. It's always lovely to chat to you, and it's hilarious that we're actually on the same page, given that I get accused of being a bull every now and then, and you get accused of being a bear. It's quite funny.
I know. Well, netted out, we're sort of somewhere in the middle. Thank you. Have a good evening. I'll take you offline and I'll close the show. See ya.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there we go. I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. Just to say that next week we'll have Damien Klassen on. We're going to talk about the markets again, and of course, interesting month. Markets a bit stronger. The ASX was quite strong today, and we might even talk about crypto and what's happening there as well. So make your note for that next week, and keep a track for the recorded shows during the week. But thank you very much for spending time with us. The dogs, the dogs are still there, so I'll give you one last look at the dogs. Meteor's actually looking at me, thinking it's time for her evening walk, so that'll be the next job on my agenda tonight. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. Thanks for all the super chats and all the comments, really appreciate it. And we will see you next week on the next live show. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Cheerio.